Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Spiegel tent for this event with Carol Birch and Sam Baker. My name is Viv Groskop. I'm a writer and possibly inappropriately for this event, comedian, although we are supposed to be referencing the theme of strong women, so I'll embody that in my job choice. Let me introduce the two fabulous authors we've got for us here today. First of all, Carol Birch, author of Orphans of the Carnival. And this is a bit of a first, isn't it? Because the book's not actually out yet. So we're very lucky to have you. 1st of September, great. Carol's the author of 11 previous novels, including Jamrach's Menagerie, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and the London Book Award. She's also won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize and the David Hyam Award for Best First Novel. This new novel, evoking the strange and thrilling world of the Victorian Carnival, has already had some rave advanced press. From M.R. Carey, he says, a rich and wonderful book. Carol Birch can see the world in a grain of sand and then furnish it for you vividly and unforgettably. Carol Chanter, the writer, says, an extraordinary portrait of an extraordinary woman. Sam Baker is the author of The Woman Who Ran. She grew up in Hampshire and after a degree in politics at Birmingham University became a journalist, going on to edit some of the UK's biggest magazines. In 2015, she co-founded and launched The Pool with Lauren Laverne, an online platform that creates inspiring and original content for busy women. Her novel, The Woman Who Ran, has had a raft of amazing reviews. From the Sunday Times, a fast-paced thriller, I tore through this. Financial Times, Baker excels at orchestrating the steadily rising tension. And from The Guardian, disquieting, thought-provoking, and keeps twisting and turning as it hurtles towards a hair-raising climax. Please welcome Carol Birch and Sam Baker. Now, we're going to kick off with a reading from each of our authors, because although there are a lot of themes in common here that we'll get into, these are two very different books, and I wanted you to get a flavour of just how different they are. So Sam and Carol are each going to read a short extract and give a bit of a précis of what the books are about. Then I'll chat to them for a bit, and then we'll open up to questions from you. So Sam, would you like to start and tell us about the book and give us a flavour of it?
Yeah, okay. So The Woman Who Ran is about a photojournalist called Helen Graham. And in the loosest possible sense, it's based on Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and really just picks up on the themes of that novel. It is in no way anywhere near as good as Anne Bronte. And I'm going to read you a bit from the middle of the book where Helen has turned up at a remote house in the Yorkshire moors. And this is about halfway through. Sorry, can you hear me? I'm short. What can I say? You're quite short too, though, aren't you? You need short people mics. Okay, cool. So I'm going to read you a bit from the middle of the book. I was hoping to run into you. Why, other than that you clearly enjoy my company? Gil blinked and flushed a little more. He looked around, forgetting her question and his embarrassment, simply seeing the view. Long stretches of rolling dale and gorse and the smudge of another world in the far distance. Helen was impressed. She liked people who could see. So many people couldn't. Most of those who could were like her and looked at the world through a lens of some kind. Just the retired journalist in me, I guess, said Gil. Helen's face flickered and saw him clock it. You don't like journalists? She shrugged. I can take them or leave them. But you've met some. When she didn't reply, he smiled. I thought so. Most people haven't. They think that what they see on the TV is the truth. We're either scumbags or truth-seeking saints. Helen raised her eyebrows. And which are you? Neither. For most of us, this is just a job. You really have met some, haven't you? Do you know what they say about you in the village? No, but I don't doubt you're going to tell me. He was driving at something, and Helen wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know what. At least half of them think you're a rock star. Helen contemplated pointing out that rock stars were an endangered species, about as common as snow tigers and white rhinos. A dozen still in captivity, maybe 2. These days, you might just about be a pop star, but you are more likely to be a celebrity, famous for 5 minutes at most. Not taken with the rock star idea? What do the other half think? Oh, that you're a rich bohemian, a painter or a sculptor. But then you'd be up here with your oils and your easel, or down at the house with a chisel and a chainsaw, attacking some block of wood. Instead, you're up here with your Leica. They looked at each other. It's a good model, he said. Old, but good. Serious. I used to be serious about photography, Helen found herself saying. She had moved before, many times, and fast. She could do it again. She didn't need anything she hadn't come with, just her laptop and her cameras. Slamming the lid on the laptop, she scooped it off the table and ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Grabbing her rucksack from the bedroom floor, she stuffed her clothes into the bottom, dirty, mixed with clean running kit on top, and then went in search of the charger. She needed to be somewhere else, but where? She'd come to almost like Wildfell, she realised, even with its noises and its shadows. She'd got used to it, at least. She liked having the Dales behind her. This had become about more than hiding. Here, for the first time, she'd found somewhere she felt strangely that she belonged. Not the people, not even the ramshackle wreck of a house, and certainly not her. It was the silence and the space, and the fact that Wildfell's ruin was nature's revenge for building a pile on the edge of such a windswept wilderness. The holes in the roof were storm damage. Wind had ripped the biggest branch from the rotting oak tree. The wall below the terrace was broken by subsidence. She'd had enough of buildings split by mortar fire and cars torn apart and overturned. She never wanted to see a burnt-out office block again. Since the boy, that was all she'd been able to photograph. Broken buildings standing in for broken people. It was easier to look at damaged buildings, to look at them and see their damage, to marvel at the ruin, the firestorms and the rain of shells that brought Beirut, Fallujah, Tripoli, Damascus into that state. You couldn't do that with people. It was easier just to look away.
Thank you, Sam. So, as you can tell, Sam's work, it's a psychological thriller, and her main character, Helen, is a war photographer who is occupying this building, which echoes the tenant of Wildfell Hall, and everyone's wondering who she is, and it's a contemporary setting. However, Carol's work takes us back to the 19th century.
Partly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually got a dual narrative, but the main thrust of the story is in the 19th century. And it's based on the life of Julia Pastrana, who some of you may already know about, but it's surprising how many people I find don't know about Julia, who was a real woman who was born in Mexico, mid-19th century, and she was born with two different medical conditions which at that time weren't understood. Hypertrichosis, which means that the body is completely covered in hair, and also she had a prognathic jaw and a strange gum condition, which meant that basically she looked like an ape to people, and she had a very interesting life, an incredible life. She went from Mexico toward the States, toward Europe, and ended up in St. Petersburg. I'm just going to read you a little bit about her first stage appearance. She left home at 20, wanting more than what she had in a very enclosed environment, and went on the stage. And this is she had like the freak show circuit and the Carnival circuit, and then she ended up doing grand music halls and so on. And this is her first appearance in New Orleans. The theatre was a great gold cavern with a thrilling echo. The lights lit up faces, row after row after row, everyone fixed on her. She smiled beneath her veil. Her lips had dried up, so she tried to lick them, but her tongue, too big at the best of times, had dried up too, and seemed to have doubled in size. Sing to the people at the back, Rates had told her. The back was miles away. But first, the band struck up the minute waltz, a little run on the tips of her toes, then into the dance, keeping time with all the changes, twirl, pirouette, turn, slow down. then into the Hungarian dance, and from there to flamenco, swishing her skirts and stamping. The crowd cheered. When she stopped and curtsied, they cheered more. Then Rates walked out and took her hand, taking it high to his lips and bowing to her as if she was a great lady. "Wonderful, Julia," he said to her quietly. Then turned to face the audience. "And now it is time," he cried, "to reveal to you one of the great wonders of our time, the only one of her kind, the nonpareil, the most remarkable being known to mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, I give you..." They had rehearsed it time after time above Brady Childer's grocery shop. She held herself ready, arranging her face into an easy yet dignified smile that would become more animated as the audience relaxed. And after all, what more was this than what she'd been doing all her life, one way or another? The one and only. She stepped away from him and lifted one elegant white-gloved hand to the end of her veil. "Miss Julia Pastrana," she unveiled. There was a moment of absolute silence, a second or two at most, then a collective sucking like a hurricane, drawing in its breath to blow. Few people shrieked. Julia walked towards the front of the stage. She heard a wag in the audience say, "It's a chimpanzee in a dress." Someone shouted, "Loo-garoo!" She laughed. Her eyes twinkled. Her smile was genuine. Now that she was on, she didn't feel so bad. "I'm looking at you," she thought. "You are looking at me. And you're paying." The band played Dorona. She'd sung it hundreds of times. It's what she'd always done. She sang it tonight with a certain lightness and spring that somehow accentuated its tragedy, walking up and down the front of the stage and peeling off her long white gloves, discarding them as she looked out into the sea of faces, meeting eyes boldly, as fascinated by them as they were by her. The crowd roared and waved its handkerchiefs, and it was such a glorious moment. She thought she might faint. That's it.
Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you, Carol. I am interested to know from the audience, actually, and drawing on my own ignorance to some extent, both of these topics. Who in the room has read Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall? And who in the room had heard of Julia Pastrana, the magnificent ape woman? Okay. The mule-faced woman.
That was a different woman, actually.
Oh, that was a
right,
different woman. Okay,
yes.
it's a bit of competition,
Yeah.
freak
There was
competition.
quite a lot of different
Okay, that's
people,
interesting.
yeah.
So obviously, Tenant of Wildfell Hall is slightly better known than the
Yes.
ape woman. Both fascinating.
Yes.
But this is really interesting to me when an author takes a pre-existing subject. In your case, it's a work of fiction. In your case, it's someone's life. Sam, where did you get the idea to draw on that? Has it always been a book that you've loved?
Yeah, well, I have always loved The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I always felt it was, slightly unpopularly felt it was the best Bronte novel, which kind of is usually used to be an opinion you kept to yourself, really. And I started to wonder whether it had, whether the reason that it wasn't so well known was just because it had aged too badly and that the themes maybe, hadn't travelled. But when I read it, feedback. When I reread it about 3 years ago now, it struck me that whilst some of it is very dated, I mean, for instance, the original Helen Graham is incredibly pious, which, takes some getting over. But the themes of the novel, which are fundamentally about gender relations and the imbalance of power between men and women, particularly in relationships, are still just as pertinent today as they were then. So that made me want to explore it, really.
And Julia's life is a real exploration of that imbalance of power, isn't it?
Yeah, for other reasons, obviously, yes, because as well as at the time that just for a woman like her, she actually had quite a sort of the childhood she was taken she was originally brought down from the mountains and taken into an orphanage and then adopted by the governor of Sinaloa in Mexico, who, in a sense, she was treated very well. She was comfortable, she had a home, she was protected. But at the same time, she had absolutely no autonomy at all. She wasn't allowed to go out alone and so on. If she could only go out with heavily veiled. I mean, this continued throughout her life, So for her it was a different kind of challenge, I think, and I do think she was quite remarkable in that she met that challenge. She left home. She could have stayed at home and remained living in this sheltered environment, which was quite luxurious in a way, although she was always, having been adopted into the household, she was still treated as a servant, and she was taught to read and write and music and so on. But she was also the servant. She was like basically a servant who was brought out on occasion to entertain the guests and as a kind of family curiosity. So in a sense she was treated well, but then she had absolutely no control over her own life, and she took it into her own hands at the age of 20 to leave and go and try and find another kind of life. And she ended up on the stage, and now you could see that. It depends, this was in the era when the Carnival and the freak show circuit was big. And she lived on that circuit for quite a while. And what I was kind of interested in was how that was for people, because I did quite a lot of reading about all this, and there's a kind of idea we have that they were there were terrible exploitations going on. At the same time, there were some who used it as an escape and as a means of finding independence, the only way that was open to them. So that's kind of what interests me.
And for authors, how does it feel when you're working with a story that already exists that might be familiar to some of your readers? Is that a jumping off point, or do you feel you've got to keep weaving it in? And do you feel some sort of responsibility to try and capture something of the original story?
Well, for me, it was very much a jumping off point. Like I said, I wanted to see which themes were still relevant, and actually listening to Carol talk, it's so interesting how the theme is kind of the same in both the books. It's about, being in a kind of luxurious prison, if you like, and taking a choice to enter what might be another prison in search for autonomy and regaining your independence. And I think it was much harder than I expected, actually. And in the first draft, I sought to go as far away from the tent as well as possible. I chucked out the structure and just took the theme and nothing else. But in the end, I went back to the structure of the original novel just because it was better, frankly. Strangely, Anne Bronte had done a better job of structure than me. Who knew that could be done? But no, it's very much taking the themes as a jumping off point and working out the relevance of that. And in the original, Helen, it was possible to vanish in 1840. If you had the wherewithal, you got in a coach and went, and it wasn't necessarily going to be easy to find you. But if you were a woman, in the book was published in 1848, I think. It was not, you were the property of your husband. You didn't own anything. You had no rights. So she had different challenges. Whereas, trying to vanish in 2015, 2016 is an entirely different. It's whether or not it was possible was one of the things that really interested me.
Yeah, and for you, Carol, was this a jumping off point, or was this something you had to do a lot of research to try and maintain what we know about this story?
Yeah, I did quite a lot of research. I think if it's a real person, you have a duty to know as much about their life as you can. So I did do a lot of research. Having said that, a hell of a lot of it is just me making things up. Obviously she is my fictional Julia, the real woman who knows. This was the way she came to me, basically. I kind of tried to go into her, how it might have been, and so on. And I wanted to look further because I found the interesting things about her life as well was this relationship with the man. She married her manager and travelled with him and so on, and they had a child. And I was interested in that relationship. He has generally been looked upon, and I can understand exactly why, as a villain, an absolute bounder and a cad, this man, for reasons which I don't want to give away too much about the book, but he did behave very, very badly. Having said that, I don't like doing villains and heroes. And I found the more I dug about into him, very little is known about him. So I had carte blanche really to make him up. But the more I found out, I did find little sort of inroads here and there. I don't think he was a total villain. And I thought the fact that he's a total villain rests upon the idea that it was totally impossible that he could have been fond of her. Oh dear. That he could have been fond of this woman. And I thought, in a way, that's an assumption everyone is making, that if you see pictures of Julia, she doesn't look like an ordinary person. She is strange looking. The idea that is behind that is that if they, which they did, they had sexual relations, they had a child, they married, that he couldn't possibly have actually really wanted to. And I thought, what if it was more complicated than that? He was an odd character and very complex, I thought, and I wanted to go into that. I think it was far more ambiguous, so that was another thing that I wanted to explore with it.
Yeah, there is an abusive relationship at the heart of both of your books. When you're having an idea like that and wanting to portray that, do you have in mind the idea of feminism and that you want to put across a strong character where the woman sort of wins, in inverted commas? I know you're saying you don't like heroes and villains. Or do you approach it in a more nuanced way and just think, well, where would this go? Let's see what happens.
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely not. I mean, you definitely could argue that The Descendant of Wildfell Hall is one of the most important feminist novels ever written, but I don't think that she set out to write a feminist novel. I think she set out to write about what she thought was wrong with society as she saw it. I mean, I don't know, obviously, but that's my reading of it. No, I think when I started writing novels, there was a lot of pressure to write likeable characters. You know, women, you had to be good or bad, like say you had to be a villain or a hero. And I do have a villain, I suppose, but I think this idea that you can't just be a person, and I have a real issue with the word phrase, strong women. I mean, Helen is strong, but she's also weak. And one of the reasons, I made her a photojournalist, or two reasons. One was because the original Helen painted in oils. And she painted in oils in order to earn money, to allow herself to escape. And at that point, if women did any painting, it was always in watercolour. So I wanted to try to find a profession for my Helen that would be as, I can't even think of the phrase, as maverick, if you like. But also, I think I wanted a job that you had to look like you were a brave, strong person to do. And then to kind of counterplay that with the fact that women who are in abusive relationships or controlling relationships, even now people still say, why did you stay? You must, that you're assumed to be weak if you're in that relationship, and especially if you stay in it. And I wanted to explore, different sorts of strength, if you like. So, but no, I mean, in terms of feminism, no. I mean, I think, I can't tell you whether she wins or loses anyway, because that would spoil the story.
I know what you mean, though, about the idea that women are, women who do stay in relationships, very troubled relationships, are judged, I think, very much. And why did she go with them in the first place? It's not that simple, is it? I mean, when you meet somebody like that, very often the kind of man you were writing about in that book, which I thought was really brilliant, actually, the way you did that character, was that he was charming. He didn't have a sign on his throat saying, I'm a very nasty piece of work. You could see quite entirely how she got involved with him. And women they're not just stupid, they don't just think, I'm going to go with this man, he's obviously completely, it's not that obvious. He comes across, they're like that, those kind of people. There's a certain character that turns into the kind of man who becomes troublesome and stalks and so on. And they can be incredibly charming and wonderful on the surface, and pull people in. And the signs that they're actually not like that don't necessarily show up for quite a long time when the woman's been pulled in, I think. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the signs that they're like that don't show up on the whole outside of the relationship either. So that kind of, so that sense that, you are in some way, weak or manipulated, and also, there's a very famous book called The Charm Syndrome by Sandra Hawley, who set up Refuge, and that's very much about the fact that everybody else thinks he's wonderful.
Yes.
So I think it's quite interesting that in your book everybody thinks he's horrible, and I actually, maybe I'm a bit warped, but I quite liked him by the end.
That's funny. I have very mixed feelings towards him, actually. I think while she was Oh dear, I don't want to give too much away. It's the kind of book that's a bit hard to talk about without giving things away.
Yeah, mine too. It's done now, it's too late.
Oh dear. I think he did behave appallingly, but I think he meant a lot to her, and I think in her lifetime he did things for her which like nobody else would have done. And I thought it was quite... Julia died anyway, and he married again later on. I don't, it comes out. But I managed to dig up a thing from his second wife, a little thing about her, and she had very fond memories of him, and spoke of him very fondly. I don't think he was the kind of man I don't think he locked them in rooms and beat them up and was horrible like that. What he did was of a different level. It was something morally repugnant, but on a completely different level from that. I think in their everyday life, in some ways, he made her happy. And that also had to kind of come out in the relationship. She believed. Nowadays, a lot of people think that he was just a con man, but I think she certainly believed he loved her, and so did his second wife. So I had to kind of also try and bring that in. But yeah, I mean, people aren't that simple. People just aren't that simple. This thing, the sort of your character, the male character, was quite interesting, wasn't he? Everyone else thought that he was great, and also the thing with women that in those relationships sometimes is that they tend to kind of, people say, oh, he's a really nice bloke. What are you moaning about? And all that. And they have all that as well.
Well, this is very interesting because you've both read each other's books, which is always lovely when that happens. At a book festival, it doesn't always happen.
Not give it too much away.
Yeah, but you've both experienced the characters as if you know them in each other's books. And I was wondering, when you create characters, especially people who are unlikable or difficult or even almost criminal in some respects, how do you live with those people afterwards, especially when you finish writing the book? Do they live on as someone that you knew?
Well, only because you keep doing festivals and talking about them. No, I think you have to try and put them to bed, if you like, once, and move on to the next book, ideally. But yeah, I mean, any good character develops a life of their own anyway. Once you start writing, I'm sure you find that they kind of do their own thing to a certain extent. But to kind of go back to the thing that Carol was saying about complicated characters, I do think that you would never refer to a male character as a strong male character. And I think that what's really important is that people are complicated. Men, women, children are complicated, and it's quite nice now that I feel that we're more able to write that. I mean, it's a shame that it's then labelled novels with strong female characters, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't matter if you're able to write complex people.
So long as you're doing complicated male characters as well, you don't want to make the mistake of just having the women are all wonderfully rounded and the men are just these kind of nasty people. That's
two-dimensional.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah, you're both very adept at drawing out character, and both of these works of fiction are very heavily character-based. But there's also a lot of plot work going on here as well, and I don't want to ignore the fact, Carol, that you do have a dual narrative here, which... Does that work to serve the plot when authors have that? Yes.
Well, I don't know about general. I'm not making a generalisation. It does in this book, but I know that... some people don't like dual timelines. There is a much smaller sort of little thread running through the book alongside. Comes in every now and again, and there's not that much of it. It revolves around an old object, which somebody finds in the 1980s. And it's actually a very significant thing, but the actual significance of it isn't made clear till right near the end of the book, and that's why that story is there, and it had to be there to give a certain dimension to Julia's story that I think really needed to be put there, because it's a strange story. It's a story that goes beyond her actual life and what happened after her life, and so that had to be there for me to complete what I wanted to do. That had to be there. And it becomes clear towards, as you complete the process, it becomes clear why it's there. And hopefully, it kind of brings things together. But I think some people who struggle with those kind of little gaps, it's only little bits here and there, but the main thrust is Julia, but there is this important storyline going alongside, which becomes apparent why it's there, by the time you've got to the end.
And Sam, you used some time jumps as well and memory lapse to sow some seeds at the beginning.
Yeah, the original structure, the wrong structure in the first draft, I had played with, kind of a dual narrative. But in the original, Helen turns up in Wildfell. Then Gilbert Markham learns about why Helen's in Wildfell, and then could come back to the present day. And I've ended up using that device. So the first sequence of the novel is about Helen turning up in Wildfell, not knowing actually why she's there any more than anyone in the village knows why she's there. And then about 2/3 of the way through, there's I suppose, a Long Dark Night of the Soul type sequence where you find out a lot more about Helen's background and the story, her time as a photojournalist, and just kind of brings the story into relief, rather than kind of jumping back and forth. Because I think there are some incredibly good novels with, woman in 1940s, woman in 1980s, how do they link up, but I do think that's quite overused now, and it has become a little bit of a cliche.
Yeah, speaking of things that are overused, I wanted to ask both of you, because you've both written a number of novels, how does this book fit in with what you've written already? And have you felt the pressure that I think a lot of authors feel now to write things that can almost be branded as sort of, almost like you're a factory and you just churn out similar things? I mean, you've both written very different novels to this one. Has that worked out okay? Is it difficult for authors to do that?
Well, this is very different to my previous books. My first two books were crime-based. They're not very good, don't read them. And then, it's true, it's absolutely true. And then the next two that I wrote were commercial
I
women.
can see Sam's husband at the back of that room going, no!
He's got his head in his hands, it's fine, he's used to it. And then the second two, I think, they're just completely different. I'm proud of them. They're really different. So I really wanted, my heart is in suspense, and I love Daphne du Maurier, I love Patricia Highsmith, and I really wanted to, and I love the Brontes, obviously. I really wanted to write in that vein. So I was lucky that my publisher said, off you go then, and let me do it.
Well, I can't see any resistance from a publisher from this book. I can't see any publisher resisting this story. That this must have been an easy novel to get off the ground.
I don't know about that. It went through various incarnations.
Okay.
Because I've got I have quite a long backlist. So I started out doing sort of, contemporary novels, which were seen as kind of a bit fringe, kind of social realism, sort of thing. And it was only towards the end I started going into the more historical side of things. So now I'm kind of in this funny thing now where I don't want to be typecast as a historical novelist, but Jamrat was the novel that brought me more readers, and so they know me as a historical novelist. And so this would kind of fit with that, but I'm kind of feel I've done so many other things as well that I'm not quite sure. And then I've had novels which have been set partly in the past, partly in the, I'm not quite sure really. I'll just see how it goes next.
Very good. I'm going to open up to audience questions in a moment, but I wanted to ask both of you something I love to ask authors, and that is, when is the moment that you realise that you're a writer and that this can be your life, it's going to work, it's not just a pipe dream? If you have experienced that moment yet.
You knew what I was going to say, didn't you? I'm not sure that I have experienced that moment yet, to be honest, really. So I think I'm really lucky to be allowed to write and that someone publishes it. But I don't think I've had that moment yet. Maybe I will.
I don't remember having a specific moment at all. It's just been a kind of a long process, I mean, I had lots of knockbacks and things that came out and just tootled along, and Jamrat was really the first one that made any kind of breakthrough. So I suppose then...
It must be nice to
I
receive the
didn't-
call that says you're on the Booker shortlist.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose then I thought, wow, this is getting serious. But, you know, I still feel somebody's going to pull the rug out at any moment. You know, it's I don't know if all writers feel like that, but you always quite kind of think, you know, whoa, God, aren't I lucky doing this, really? You know, and someone's publishing me. I'm always just very glad that someone wants to publish me. It's lovely. It's lovely to get feedback, you know, but I haven't had a particular moment when I thought, yes, you know, it's just kind of bubbled along.
Okay. I don't want to make this about feminism, but I've never met a male author who doesn't have a yes story in response to that question. Really? Yes, really. Yeah.
Oh, God.
We'd love to have your questions. Please feel free to ask anything you want. Share reading tastes. I don't know if we've got a microphone. Yes, we have. Any questions? Burning questions? Yes. Shall I identify the speaker? No. Yes. This is novelist Kirsty Logan.
I'm really interested in what you were saying, Sam, about your story's structure and how it changed. But I would like to ask both you and Carol, were there any other kind of blind alleys or things that you did while you were writing which then you had to change?
You go first, because you said yours had lots of
Hundreds. This had about 3 or 4 different, you know, it was getting the structure was really difficult with this one. Quite often loads of stuff gets cut and left on the cutting room floor, you know. I don't usually just write from start to finish. It goes through all kinds of incarnations usually. That's the way it's always been. But this one was actually more so because I wasn't sure how I was going to fit in this other little line that I had going through. That was the main problem with this one. But yeah, I always make lots of changes.
Yeah, the main one for me was the structural one, but that was quite big because I had the past stuff woven through kind of, that strand was chronological, but within it's kind of going from the bombing of the Admiral Duncan through to now, Aleppo, Syria. So unpicking all of that, and also I changed the time frame of the relationship a bit, which was a bit. So Press probably had 3 big drafts and probably 5 in total, which is that's the most I've ever done. But I kind of didn't realise how much I'd bitten off until I started trying to chew it, if you know what I mean.
Carol, how long was this project going on for?
Well, it went on for quite a while because I started it and then I suppose it's about 5 years altogether. Right. But I wasn't working solidly all that time. You know, there was things happening as well which drew me away from it. So, yeah, but longer than the other ones have taken. Right. Don't know whether that's good or bad, really, but, yeah, quite a while.
Yeah, and Sam, this is kind of 2-year work, pretty much, although probably you'd had the idea for many years.
Yeah, I think this book probably is the book for me that's been bubbling for a really long time, really, really long time. But probably it took over 3 years because in the time I was writing it, I left Red and I was working on doing the research for the pool, and then I can't remember when it was published now, January? Yes, kept moving, that was the other thing. So I was doing other things at the same time. But yeah, this was definitely the longest because before that I was in a one a year cycle, which is it's a completely different thing really. It's quite hard work.
Very good.
It's always difficult to know when to date it from as well because you have a process where it's in your head but you're not writing it, but you're working on it in your head and so on. And I'm never sure when people say that whether they mean when you first sat down and went, right, chapter 1, you know. Or what the process is kind of not simple like that.
No, I mean, a synopsis for this book I wrote probably back when I wrote my very first book, which would have been, can't remember the date, but 12 years earlier. But I didn't use this synopsis, but I took the idea and reworked it, so yeah.
So bruise.
Yeah, mulch.
Yeah. Thank you, that's a great question. Any other questions? Do raise your hand if you have a question. So, yes. Hi. Do you want to wait for the microphone? Are we okay to bring that round to you in case we get another ambulance chasing villains?
Thank you. because you mentioned the synopsis then, I was immediately thought, oh, right, is that a common practice for writers to write a synopsis before they start writing a novel?
That's
Always?
a good question.
Well, it has...
I just never thought of it.
Oh, lucky you. I can't say it's fun, but partly because I've always been doing other things as well. It's quite helpful for me. I do plan on the whole because, keeping it in my head is not always possible. But also, I've been lucky in that most of my books have sold before I've fully written them. So people need, you need to do that. It's a sales tool to a certain extent. My agent would kill me if I didn't write a synopsis.
I'm absolutely rubbish at synopses, I'm afraid. I just don't like doing them. I find them really hard. I find them much harder to write a synopsis than to write the book. You have to do them every now and again, though. And that's the kind of thing I do, like I do my tax returns, It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's understood now that a first novel can no longer be sold on a synopsis. Mm-hmm. It used to be that it could, but now you have to write the whole thing, more or less. But if you've got books in progress and you already have a relationship with the publisher, then they will take it on trust that you are actually going to write a book.
One hopes so.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Looking around the room. I wanted to ask both of you, because you both alluded to this idea that you start on something, you've got a publisher who's waiting for it, you've got an agent who's promoted it for you and sold it, and then bits of it aren't working, and it keeps getting sent back to you, and it's being edited, and other people are... That would drive me crazy. This is why I've never written a novel. How do you keep going, and how do you keep faith with your original idea?
Prosecco. A lot of swearing. That sort of thing.
This is where I'm going wrong. I'm not drinking enough.
You've got the swearing down, you just need to sort of drink. No, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, we were talking earlier about the kind of phases of doubt. See, do you get men up on stage talking about the phases of doubt when they write? I mean, I live with a male novelist. He talks a lot about the phases of doubt. And I think, you do go through it, don't you? And you're probably second draft. That's normally quite bad because you give in I personally wouldn't give in a first draft unless I thought it was good. So you're not necessarily perfect, but quite good. Yeah. And then it comes back and you're all, so then it's a real... I think it can be hard to keep going. And because I don't write full time, I think if you write, I don't know about you, but if you write full time, it can be quite hard.
I don't have a job, put it that way, but to say I write full time, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do raise your hand if you have a question, otherwise I will just keep going. I've got so many things I want to ask you. For both of you, here it comes. For both of you, without wanting to compare you to other writers, who are you inspired by? Who did you first... But Sam, you've already mentioned some of your favourites. But who were you inspired by reading growing up, and who do you love to read now, who you might perhaps recommend to our audience looking for other ideas to buy?
Well, I'm going to say this because I would compare this book to her a bit, but I absolutely adored Angela Carter and always have. And I cried when she died. And I think this really... Reading Orphans of the Carnival really reminded me in many ways of Angela Carter, yeah. And I mean, in a slightly, maybe I'm being a bit simplistic, but boys' children, I suppose.
Oh, I'm really flattered. Thank you.
So I was a massive Angela Carter fan, and probably if I had to pick one writer, it still would be her. But then I love kind of dark, I like a bit of dark and gothic and suspense, so Highsmith, du Maurier, Bronte's, yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. When I was young, the things that really got me going were Wuthering Heights, which knocked me off my feet when I was about 12. And I loved a lot of stuff like John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath and all that I got into. And then later, I really kind of jumped into James Joyce and Beckett and people like that. And Flann O'Brien, the Irish writers, I really loved. They were a big influence. And now... Read all kinds of things. Actually, I probably don't read anywhere near as much as I should. I liked very much. Do you know Mark Danielewski's book, House of Leaves? Yeah, I loved that. I think that was great. I just really liked the whole experience, even turning the book upside down and doing all this. I loved that. So that had an impression on me lately.
Can I throw in Shirley Jackson as well?
Oh, brilliant!
Love a bit of Shirley Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert Aikman.
Oh no.
Robert Aikman, anybody?
Yeah.
Brilliant. No, Robert Aikman.
We'll investigate.
Investigate.
Yes.
Do you both read other people whilst you're writing? Sam, that must be almost impossible for you because you're doing lots of other jobs, one of which is reviewing other people's books. I'm always fascinated when writers say, oh, I don't read any other books whilst I'm writing my book. I mean, because that could go on for a year or 5 years.
No, I do, but if I'm in the midst of writing, I would definitely try not to read anything identical, with a very... So I wouldn't have written this and read lots of psychological thrillers, for instance. But, I know some people who say they don't read any fiction when they're writing fiction, and other people who say, oh, no, I read loads of it because it all feeds into the thing. So for me, it's not possible to not read any, but...
I just carry on reading, basically, and I have phases on different things, but, probably when I'm writing, when I'm really in the middle of something, I read more non-fiction, perhaps. But I don't have a specific sort of plan not to read fiction, and I do some reviewing, so I get books sent to me. And I just always wish I had time to read more, because I think, actually, I'd love to read more, and I just feel that I'm actually quite ignorant about a lot of new books coming out because of time. Yeah.
I can send you some.
Send me some.
Oh, I do.
Any other questions in the room? No, nobody's being shy. Good. I hate the expression guilty pleasure because I don't think any pleasure should be guilty, certainly not Prosecco or swearing. But for either of you, is there a guilty pleasure in your reading or in other things that you consume? I'm thinking box sets here, that you really enjoy, but you think is perhaps not quite highbrow enough?
I don't feel guilty about it, but I love a bit of Scandi crime. I really like the bridge. No, I don't feel guilty about it at all, but I can quite easily watch back to back to back to back to back. No problem.
Yeah, I'm a big box set fan, yes. I mean, I love box sets, but I'm not guilty about them, Game of Thrones, I'm absolutely addicted to Game of Thrones. I love it, I go absolutely bonkers over it. I was like, the Hound comes back, yeah! Hooray! It's worth watching again.
And there's a question, question at the front here. Have we got let's wait for the microphone for this gentleman. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Through force of circumstances, we now read, inverted commas, listen to books Audible. My wife is a genius at streaming them down, and so they're great for reading and listening together. But it's quite a different experience than actually reading them to yourself, compared with the experience of them coming out aloud, and a lot is dependent on the person who's chosen to do the narrative. Any of your books on the Audible circuit at all?
Yes, they are, and the publisher chooses in my case anyway, the publisher's chosen the narrator. But I agree. I mean, I don't really like audiobooks very much because they do change the experience. I mean, you get the occasional one. So Tandy Newton has read Jane Eyre, for instance, and it's an amazing audiobook. If you haven't heard it, it's incredible. But on the whole, I mean, definitely there's a book that I loved last year that I had the audiobook of as well, and I found the voice so off-putting that it completely changed my experience. And I agree.
Yeah, quite a few of mine are audiobooks, and so this one will be. So I have no idea who's reading it, but I don't actually personally like listening to audiobooks, but I don't really need to, but yes, it can be awful to hear somebody reading something in a voice that just grates, but I think it's just the luck of the draw, really, and it might work for other people. It's hard to say.
Great, thank you. That's a lovely question. I do like a recommendation of audiobooks. Yes, there's a question here at the back. I feel bad making you run around, but we are supposed to be talking about strong women, so.
When do you know that you've finished your novel? When do you think, that's it, cracked it, last page, last word? And you can walk away from it happily and say, that's the finished article.
Never.
Never?
No,
Never.
I mean, you just have to stop at some point.
You just have to
really.
stop because otherwise you're gone forever. And then I still, when I come to sort of work out what I'm going to read, I think, oh God, no. And I still look at it and think, no. And I'm still editing, but it's too late. Just have to accept it now.
Yeah.
But I still do feel that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yes, I've heard many, many tales of authors physically writing in their own book, which is dog-eared from years of reading at book festivals,
I do
still
that,
changing it.
Crossing bits out. Oh shit, why did I put that? You know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I think it's perhaps the ability of authors to do that and go through that process and put something that even they consider is imperfect out there that marks them out, as opposed to ordinary people who are never going to write a book.
We might take that as a statement.
Yeah.
You've got something.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yes. Question. How far? Oh, yeah.
There was
you
one
were
at the
there.
back
That's
as
good.
well.
What do you think you can say in fiction that you can't say in non-fiction?
Ooh,
That's a big question.
wouldn't you?
Yeah, I can't believe you let him ask one.
Should have ignored him.
I think
But
you have to answer that because
neither of
it's
you
your
have,
editor.
have you published non-fiction books?
I haven't.
You've both published fiction books.
Yes, I've never
Yeah.
done non-fiction. God, that's really hard. I don't know. You've got more leeway to imagine, haven't you? I suppose. Mm-hmm. If you read non-fiction about people, you know, it's factual. People do extrapolate, people make suppositions and so on. But in fiction, you can really kind of go into it and pretend and imagine. I suppose you've got that. Yeah, that's about. I can think of another thing. You know, you've got more leeway. You've got freedom to imagine, which you don't have perhaps so much with non-fiction, although you do.
I suppose
Very vague answer.
also you can kind of give a character a bit more life than they might otherwise have had. I mean, earlier this year I judged the Desmond Elliott and a book that didn't win but was very good, Mrs. Engels. And it's about Mrs. Engels and her sister. And her sister has, her Wikipedia page is about that big. Obviously, Engels' Wikipedia page goes on forever. And Mrs. Engels she has a footnote on her sister's half page. So, you know, when I was reading it, a lot of the time I was wondering, you know, most of it, you couldn't know whether or not most of it had happened. So, in a way, that brought an incredible woman to life in a way that non-fiction couldn't possibly have done, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. I hope that answers your very difficult question. Yes,
Yeah,
one at the
so
back
him ask
here.
another one.
Hi. What's your least favourite thing about either writing or being a writer?
Backache. Sitting at a computer and getting backache, I think. And I don't know, I feel very lucky to be published and to be a writer. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth and complain too much.
Yeah, rewriting, I think. It's the writing bit is fine. It's the rewriting that's not.
Great question. Good. Well, I think on that note, we're going to continue the conversation in the place that is known apparently as the Adult Bookshop, which is the shop just to the left out of here, where both authors will be signing copies of these fantastic books, which we're very lucky to get in advance of the publication date. I think they should have some, yeah.
Have you got some of the actual book?
Yes, this is just a review copy and Sam's brilliant book. So thank you so much to all of you for your great questions, except for you. And thank you so much for our fabulous authors, Carol Birch and Sam Baker.